IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Habit Coach podcast. I'm Ashdin Doctor, your habit coach. And today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about influence. Now, in today's day and age, the word influence has been thrown around so much. That person's an influencer, he's an influencer. But the important thing is that we can all learn to create influence. And I think influence is an important currency in today's day and age, the way that we live our lives because we are social beings. And we have a fantastic guest with us. We have Zoe Chance, who's written a fantastic book called Influence is Your Superpower. I've read half the book so far and I'm absolutely loving it. I can't wait to have this discussion with Zoe. Zoe, welcome to the Habit Coach podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. Zoe, influence, how did you get involved with influence? How did you decide to, choose this as a topic? What is the journey here?
Ashton, I guess I got initially interested in it because I felt so uninfluential and I was really, really shy. I was super nerdy as a kid and I didn't understand what was it that had some people have lots of friends and people like me not have so many friends. So I was really paying attention to these things from a young age. I started doing theater like a lot of other nerdy kids because if you're on stage, people actually have to listen to you. I had this theory back in high school or so that my voice was the same timbre frequency as the ambient sounds in the universe. And that's why people spoke over me and didn't seem to hear what I said. But as I started learning theater and really paying attention to what other people were saying and doing, and then I ended up, through my theater skills, getting into sales, I got a good understanding eventually of how we influence other people is especially by how they feel about us. And then I started studying this more carefully when I was in industry. I worked as a brand manager for Barbie at Mattel and then went to Harvard to study behavioral economics and the psychology of what helps us influence other people. So I guess the short answer is, Ashton, I was interested in influence because I sucked.
But that's so true, right, Zoe? Because I see so many people who feel that they cannot be part of a conversation because they're soft or they are timid, like you said. How do you start getting out of that shell?
I love working with people who are naturally introverted or naturally more quiet because what I've seen is that actually there's no barrier to influence except in our mind. And we can all think of people who are highly influential, but more on the introverted or quiet end of the spectrum. But those people aren't the people that typically pop to mind when we think of who's an influential person, or especially when we're trying to think of something like who's a charismatic person. When we think of famous people, someone who comes to mind for me as a highly influential, more introverted personality would be the Dalai Lama. He's somebody whom I admire. We can think of a lot of other spiritual teachers probably who are on that side of the spectrum. But even when we look in our organizations and you think about someone who doesn't speak maybe that often, but when they speak, everyone else closes their mouth to listen. So introversion isn't a barrier, but self consciousness is a barrier. And that's what was the real barrier for me. When I was shy, it wasn't that I was quiet. It was that my attention was focused on myself and, oh, how am I sounding and what are they going to think? And should I say this or not say this? And then the opportunity has already flown by. And, eventually I say the thing that I should have said 5 minutes ago.
Or you get
So,
that smart answer when you're having a bath the next day and it's like, oh shit, I should have said that
oh,
yesterday.
yeah.
It
Yes,
happens every time.
absolutely.
But Zoe, you said something very important, right? Like a person does not say anything, but when he does speak or she does speak, everyone listens, right? So can you have influence without talking? Can you have that presence without talking?
Yes, actually, connection happens most in pauses. And I was just teaching yesterday. I had a group of executives in my classroom at Yale, and I was teaching this exercise that I wrote about in the Charisma chapter that you were just reading, which I call it shining. And it's this demonstration of connecting with a whole room of people by connecting with each, not every person, but connecting one by one with individuals and we get this vicarious sense of connection. But the person who was practicing was a little nervous and she was speaking so quickly. And I was coaching her to slow down and pause so that all of our attention comes to you when we pause. And there was one person in the audience that she's trying to connect with, and the audience member is just not feeling it. And so she's trying again, and then and I'm trying to coach her to pause, and she's just powering through. And I said, all right, listen, actually just pause. Just pause. And she's like, you mean I speak and then no, just pause. And for it didn't take even 10 seconds where she just pauses and in silence makes eye contact with this woman in the audience who hadn't been feeling it. And the whole room just goes, ah, because you felt this connection in the pause.
So everyone connects in a crowd, right? That's what I was reading in the charisma chapter as well. Everyone is, it's almost like the crowd is one person after that connection takes place.
The crowd, yeah, it's like we're this collective entity. I experienced this myself most dramatically when I got to go to a Prince concert, and I had been a fan since I was a child. And when Prince takes the stage, I felt that he was looking right into my eyes. He takes the microphone and he says, "Are we alone?" And I turned to my friend next to me and I said, "Oh my God, Eldar, I think I'm going to faint." And then the woman next to me, total stranger, actually faints. She collapses out cold on the floor because she felt this vicarious za. Because we connect with a group by connecting one on one. And I describe in the chapter about this how Prince actually wasn't charismatic at all when he started out. In fact, he really sucked at connecting with people too. And he was so shy that he would play with his back to the room and he could barely speak above a whisper. And he too had to practice this. But what happens when we connect with one person is another person feels our humanity. And it doesn't matter if you were looking into the eyes of that one person. Like, I don't know if Prince was trying to connect with me or the person next to me or the stage lights were on him and he couldn't see any of us directly. But he understood that connecting with many takes connecting with one. And Ashton, that's exactly what you do on this podcast, right? So you're connecting with me in our one on one conversation so that other people who are listening can feel us connecting with them.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Zoe, because I was actually going to ask you a question very similar, saying that in today's day and age, when we are, talking to a camera half the time, we don't even see the audience because we record a video and it goes up maybe 4 days later. How do we connect one on one with somebody like that? Like right now, we are having a conversation, but if it's just me talking to a camera, how do we create that kind of a connect? Are there techniques? Is there something that you need to practice?
So, first of all, when you have the opportunity to have it be a conversation between two people, research shows that people listen longer and they're more engaged when they're looking at two people having a conversation rather than one person talking to the camera. But all of us, or at least many of us, get in that situation you're talking about where it's just me. Honestly, I still find it much, much harder to feel like I'm connecting with the audience when I have to do a session where it's just me talking to the camera. But the talking to the camera piece is important because the camera is how you make eye contact. So rather than talking to where you would see somebody's face or where you do see their face on the screen, this is even in a Zoom meeting or meeting with a group of people. If you're talking to the camera, people feel that you're talking to them. And if you use language like you're talking to one person rather than like you're talking to a group of people. So saying the singular second person you rather than people or you guys or they or them. People will feel more like you're talking to them and pausing. But you don't, when I say pausing, you can still speak quickly in a virtual environment because people are used to hearing people speak quickly in television, movies, things like that. But you still want to pause.
That was actually a question that I had planned to ask you because in today's day and age, when you're thinking about communicating or holding somebody's attention, is all about how fast can you make the cuts, right? And put as little pause as possible, make sure that there's no dead air because people will immediately click on something else. You want to hold their attention, and it's a constant chase. And in that chase, how do you be calm? How do you be, how do you have your pauses that help connect with the audience? Is it a challenge? Are you seeing something changing in the virtual world now?
The virtual world is very different from the real world. So, in the real world, when you're on stage, there's this time warp that happens where time passes faster for the speaker than the audience. And this is why, when you see, especially someone who's not a very comfortable speaker, they tend to speak really, really quickly. And in the audience, you're like, I can't even have my mind catch up. And then I'm just getting distracted and thinking about my next thing. In a virtual environment, it's fine to speak more quickly, but we still need that pause for people to catch up. So if it's something that you're preparing in advance, you decide what are your most important points, and this is where you pause. And even tiny pauses where you have, a comma, some piece of punctuation, still pausing a little bit, varying the speed, varying the tempo, varying the tone. That's what has people listen and be engaged. If you're just speaking very, very quickly without modulation, then they're also going to tune out.
I think that's so critical because in today's day we see attention seeking or attention grabbing or attention holding as influence. Would you like to just explain to us a little bit about what is influence versus holding attention versus the other things that influence is often mistaken with?
Influence is a really broad term, and I use it to mean anything that changes somebody's thoughts or behavior. So there are lots of different types of influence, including coercion. There's influence through social media or interpersonal. You could have conscious or unconscious influences. And a lot of people, and actually a lot of my favorite people who are very kind and smart and well intentioned, are inclined to shy away from studying or learning about or practicing influence, and I'm putting this in air quotes, because they don't want to be manipulative. And what happens if we steer away from learning about influence with all of our good intentions is that we leave influence, which is ultimately power, in the hands of power hungry people who don't care at all about being manipulative or not, and they just want to do whatever it takes. So you mentioned influencer, and you and I were talking earlier about the idea of being an influencer. And you are an influencer, but it sounded like it took you a little while to make peace with that. Can you say something about that for our listeners?
It's so true because it's funny when you started on this journey you were like how many people are going to listen to me, and then in India especially the word influencer became very popular. Like people who would try and sell you things were called influencers. You had travel influencers, you had food influencers, and in my mind I was like, I don't want to be labeled as an influencer. Like, I'm a coach, I'm supposed to be guiding you, I'm supposed to be I want to make your life better. I don't want to influence you into, oh, this kind of probiotic brand is better than that kind of probiotic brand, etc., etc., right? And it took me a long while, and I struggled with this because for the last 2 3 years I've done zero brand influencing or pushing products or anything on any of my platforms, because I didn't want to come across as somebody trying to influence in that context. However, I was talking to one of my consultants and he was saying, but Ashton, you do realize that you are influencing people's behavior, right? Whenever somebody listens to one of your habits and they implement it, you influence their behavior in some way. So why are you shying away from the thought of being an influencer? And right now, when you were talking, another penny dropped when you said that if you are not going to take that currency, that power, somebody else will, who does not necessarily have good intentions. So if your intentions are pure, maybe it is your duty to actually use that influence in a correct way.
I absolutely believe that. And I believe that even though there probably wasn't any actual intentional spoken conspiracy to malign the word influencer, Just that frame that we shy away from. I don't like the idea of thinking about myself as an influencer, even. But when we do that, then we are giving influence to people like the purveyors of disinformation, like Putin's troll farm, who can influence people, for example, in the United States, on both sides of a political issue, just so that our democracy will crumble.
Right.
And we are leaving influence to people like just some kind of more benign, but just greedy person who doesn't care what they're hawking, if it's some brand of probiotics or some diet pill or whatever that is. But the reality is that we're all influencers. So it's not
Right.
that there are influencers and non influencers, it's that there are people who practice interpersonal skills of influence more than other people. And then we each have our own goals for what we're practicing that for. Like, how beautiful is that you're practicing influence to help people build better habits? What could be unadmirable about that? It's wonderful.
You're not going to believe this, but that was my journaling in today. This morning's journaling was absolutely at this point. So I'm so happy that it's come up again when we are talking. You said something very interesting. You said practice influence, right? Right now in this last sentence. How do you practice influence?
It starts with being open minded to the possibility of practicing influence. And then
Okay.
just figuring out, like in building any habit, a baby step. And a baby step that I encourage people to start with that is simple, not easy, but profoundly transformational is to say no. And when I'm teaching class at Yale, I teach this 7 week boot camp class called Mastering Influence and Persuasion, and that's where the whole book came from. In class, our first real world challenge is to say no for 24 hours to every person who comes and asks you for something. And you might hear that and just go like, oh God, yes, no, I'm definitely not going to do it. That's fine. You choose what's the right step for you. But I'll share the psychology behind saying no and why this is so powerful. Most of us, definitely, if we're in those group of kind, smart, well-intentioned people I talked about, we don't want to be manipulative and we don't want to pressure people. So we feel uncomfortable asking for things and we feel uncomfortable saying no. And it puts us in a bind where we are trying to be helpful and we are completely exhausted because we're trying to be self reliant for ourselves, but we're not expecting others to be self reliant. And so we're mentally, physically, totally depleted and trying to be this good person, but frazzled. And I don't know if you can relate to that if you're listening. I can definitely relate to this. And what happens when we start to say no is, first of all, we realize all the things that we're saying yes to that we weren't even conscious of, and how we have this limited time in a day, limited time on earth. And we had just sort of opened up our agenda to the universe to allow other people to determine how we spend our time, which is insane. And it's our most valuable resource, non replenishable, right? And then we also realize that when we're saying no to other people, they don't hate us, they don't try to murder us, they don't have grudges against us. It depends how we say no, but most of the time it's okay because they weren't really expecting us to say yes. Or it's okay because they have somebody else to ask. And it wasn't the end of the world. So it actually meant less to them than we felt like it did. And the magic here, real deep magic, is that as we get more comfortable saying no, we get more comfortable with the idea of other people saying no to us. And then when we are asking other people for help or resources or contacts, introductions, whatever it is we're asking for, our requests lose this needy edge that turns people off. So it really sucks that the needier you are, the more people want to say no to you because we don't like to be pressured And you know that about yourself. I think we're all this way. So saying no indirectly leads to asking in a more relaxed way that has other people want to say yes to us.
I love it. It's giving and receiving of no's, right? The more no's you give, the more no's you receive. Practicing that, I think, creates a sense of comfort in you.
Yeah.
I
And
remember Warren Buffett once said, sorry,
no, go
you were saying.
ahead. I want to hear what
Rem-
Warren Buffett said.
Warren Buffett says that my entire job now is just to say no to people because everyone's coming with an ask. And if I keep saying yes to every question or everything that people ask me about my business, I won't get anywhere. So it's just about saying no. And it's so true because the more influence I got, and I'm using the word appropriately here, the more influence I started getting, the more requests I started getting. And it was crazy from getting one request for a speaking assignment maybe once in 2 weeks. Now there are 10 every single day. And you constantly have to say no to people. And it's actually exhausting to keep saying no to people going ahead.
Yeah. And you still feel that even though you've had practice? I still
It's
feel, yeah, I
yeah,
still feel a little bit like, oh, so sorry. It doesn't get totally easy to say no. I find also it doesn't get totally easy to ask, even though I've had a lot
yeah,
of practice asking. Like when I was asking
correct.
for book blurbs, I don't know if you had this feeling also. It was like, oh, you're like, do I really want to approach these people that I might have some relationship with, but it's not my BFF, and
Yeah.
ask them for a book blurb? And how do I make it comfortable for other people to say no so that they will hopefully say yes? But this saying no challenge, if you're listening and you're thinking about taking this on, couple of things. First of all, you can change your mind. So the experience of saying no is for you to see what it feels like and how the other person reacts. It doesn't mean that you have to maintain that no if it's something you really wanted to do, but you're testing your default reaction where instead of having a default yes, like many of us do, to open that up a little bit, give yourself some space to even have a default, let me think about it. Thank you for asking, and can I get back to you? And you can also just take care of your life. Don't ruin it. So if your sweetie proposes to you and you want to say yes, don't use that opportunity to be like, yeah, no. Oh, wait, I changed my mind. If you get your dream job offer, right? So take care of your life. And this practice is saying no to each person, and it doesn't mean you have to say no to every single request. So if you have someone you live with or someone that you work with and they make a number of requests over 24 hours, experience saying no to that person who you might typically say yes to. And and then you just get to decide. Also, if you need to or you want to, you can explain to them what this challenge is, and they might be inspired to take on the challenge themselves.
I was actually thinking about the same thing when I was reading the chapter, saying that should I tell my family that I'm not going to be passing you the water if you ask me today because I'm going to say no to you,
What I would say
and
is don't tell them in advance, but you can explain after they asked you to pass the water and you're like, no.
and
And
I found something
they'll be
interesting as well,
excited.
which is
Yeah.
sorry, I was saying I found something interesting as well. If you tell somebody no, but ask me again tomorrow, chances are they don't ask you again the next day, and you realize that it wasn't as important for them because if you
Yes.
ask me again tomorrow, I would say yes, but alas. So I think
Yes.
it's interesting to see how important that question is for the other person because half the time we spend more time agonizing to say no than the other person took to ask the question.
That's right. It happens so often just like that. And what you just gave an example of is broadly in the style of saying no to the thing, but yes to the person. And I find that mindset shift can be very helpful for people. So, exactly what you say depends on the context. But if you tell yourself, I want to say yes to this relationship, no to this request, then it's really okay. And you can even say something like, oh my God, no, that sounds absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible, but great for you. So good luck with that. And I'm saying like, no, I hate your idea, but I don't hate you, right? And you can hear in my tone of voice, I really like you, even though we have very different taste on this particular thing. And
So
we might
critical.
say, we might just say no, thank you. and
Yeah,
just
I
keep
think
it as
no
simple
thank you
as that.
is such a powerful sentence in itself. It's a complete sentence. Zoe, tell me a little bit more about the chapters I haven't reached yet. What are the other things that you've written about that is critical for influence?
So, the way that I wrote the book is that you can just dip into any chapter at any point. And so, for anyone who's curious about it, I encourage you to look at the table of contents and just see if there's some chapter that sparks your curiosity and you want to dip in there. Some of the chapters coming up later that I get a lot of questions about include a chapter on negotiating and then negotiating while female, a chapter on defense against the dark arts, and then a chapter toward the end that brings all of these techniques together. And I tell the story of how one of my former students, who later became my husband, changed the course of history using many of these techniques that we talk about
Wow.
in the
Okay, I
book.
can't wait to reach that one. But tell me about the dark arts one. That sounds very cool.
So, this is related to what we were talking about at the beginning about power hungry people using any influence technique that could help them and training readers to look for red flags. And anybody who wants to influence you could use any kind of strategy or tactic at all. But there's some that when you see that, it doesn't mean that that person has ill intent or greed, but then it cues your mind to look for other red flags. And when you see multiple red flags, that's a sign to step back and say, all right, what is it that this person wants from me? And do I really want to do that? And a really, really simple one that is used almost universally in transactional kind of influence situations, like especially direct sales, is just urgency. So they put time pressure on you and say that you have to decide right away. Like if somebody is trying to sell you something and they're standing there in front of you, they want you to buy right now and they'll give you some special deal to buy today. And your brain is thinking, I should buy this because it's a special deal. That's the conscious part. But what's going on unconsciously is just the rush. And the rush prevents you from thinking logically. And it just has you thinking from this emotional, intuitive, shortcut based piece of your mind. And I talk about it as your alligator brain. So you're not thinking rationally and you're just saying, oh my God, I need that thing. And this is also why we buy all kinds of things on sale that then we never use later. We thought it was a great deal, but it's just because we were rushing. Another,
Yeah.
a big interpersonal cue that students will talk about in relationships. Like I go through, I think it's 9 different red flags in this chapter on the dark arts. And I'm typically talking about situations where somebody's trying to get something like money from you because this is how it most often happens. But my students will read it and then they will be thinking about their past relationships as well and noticing how in their past relationships, one of the big cues that they explained away is that you don't feel good about yourself, but you feel bad about yourself in the presence of this person or when this person is trying to persuade you to do something. And this happens in sales also, but when somebody is, you may not notice it's conscious, but they are trying to have you feel bad about yourself so that you feel you need this person or this product or this service. And this is something that people are trained in sales because they say that pain persuades. So they want to find your pain. They want to rip off the band-aid and then poke their finger into it. So if you find yourself feeling just like you're in a rush and you really need this thing or you need this person to fix something, just step back and say, why is it that I'm feeling that I need to be fixed? And has this person led me to feel that way? And that's a big red flag.
Zoe, this might go into a philosophy slash therapy session, but I need to understand this clearly because most of these red flag dark arts techniques work. right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is why they are so popular. And when people say that if you want to make online sales, you have to use these techniques. You have to use the power of repetition, you have to use the power of urgency, you have to use the power of discounts. And when I put out my habit masterclass, which is my online course, I said I'm not going to use any of these things because I feel they're all manipulative and I don't want to be manipulative. And as a result, sales were nothing, right? Like nobody got into that mindset because there's no urgency, or there is no discount, or there is no this. How do we fight these dark arts if we don't have these tools?
It's a really, really important question where I would be in your situation, for example, acknowledging that if I don't give people a time and not just a deep content based reason to buy it, but like why is this person going to buy right now? I would go ahead and I would give discounts for a particular period of time because they need a cue to say, okay, this is the time, right? This is the time to get it, not just the reason to get it, but make it really easy for people to change their minds. So to have people know you're not locked in. This is here's here's the offer that you have. First of all, it's not vanishing today. So that kind of urgency to say buy now, buy instantaneously, buy it before the end of the webinar. I believe this is just too manipulative and say, here's the week, for example. Like, here's the week, and I'll send you another reminder. And this gives them some time to decide and time to sleep on it. But here's the week where we're going to have this discount, and here's the thing that we're going to offer. And and then you have this much time to decide and experience, is this the right thing for you? So you get the benefits, the influential benefits of urgency and being timely, but you're not getting the same buyer's remorse that people experience so often when we do say yes to someone who's giving us time pressure. And mostly we don't want to be in the situation where somebody said yes to something that then they didn't want, because buyer's remorse, even if they're not buying something, but you can use that analogy, just has people trying to get out of it, and then has people complaining about it, has people posting negative reviews if it's something they can do online. So this tactical kind of influence technique that can get people to go ahead and buy now isn't necessarily the thing that's going to pay off in the long run. There's a huge study of digital marketing by the Google team in the UK, and they found that the urgency ploy was the most frequent, not surprisingly to people like you and me. The urgency tactic was the most common and absolutely by a large margin sparked the most resistance and anger and bad blood between businesses and their customers. So we need to be really graceful about how we use timing. And a graceful way to use timing that has nothing to do with urgency is to be thinking about what are the times in a person's life, or what are the times of year, or what are the things going on in current events that will have people be open minded to thinking about this thing that we have to offer. So, with habits, anyone who works in this area will know, but other people not thinking about, you probably put a lot of things out in January, right? Like there's in our industry, we call it New Year, New You, right? In the
Correct.
first month of the year, people are thinking about New Year's resolutions. And that's why when you're listening and then you notice next January, you'll get a lot of self help, habit based, life change, gym membership, like all kinds of habit changing opportunities that come out in January. And of course, it gets a little bit crowded. But thinking about what are other situations when, and what indicators do you have of people changing their habits? So, how can you find out when somebody is moving to a new apartment or home? How can you find out about when somebody is switching to a new job? Every single thing that changes our day to day routine is an opportunity for us to change our habits. And Ashton, you know all of these things, but people who are listening may not be conscious of this, that there are very specific opportunities that people have to change their habits. And that's when you're going to be more open to thinking about something like a habit change program. And then there are times of year, like back to school is a time of year when families are changing their routine. So you get the advantage of timing without just focusing on urgency.
I love this. You can put a life stage in, a yearly life stage. So when you're doing your taxes, what are your
Yeah.
financial habits? When you're doing this, so
Yes.
you're using that opportunity, but you're not necessarily using urgency at that point of time or a tactic like that. And you're not necessarily making the person feel bad about themselves so that they come and buy your product.
Yes. And when we're
Do you
talking
suck at
about,
your taxes? Do the do
yeah, when we're talking about interpersonal influence, it's much easier than online, although this can happen in some cases online. It's it's like a ninja move to ask somebody what is going to be the best time. And so they tell you, like you said, Ashton, you said, I can't say yes today, but come back and ask me tomorrow. And then remember this, or even ask if they're saying not today. Okay, when would be a good time for me to come back and ask you? And you've said, in this case, tomorrow. So when I come back and I ask you tomorrow, I say, when we talked yesterday, you said that today would be a good time for me to, is it still a good time? And then you have their absolute attention because they've told you that this is the time. And broadly, what we're talking about are these moments of truth where this is a time, place, context when people are likely to be open to influence. And one of the big underappreciated ones is when they told you they would be open to your influence and to having this conversation with you.
correct. It's amazing because then you've got them on your team, right? Instead of forcing yourself down. And so, this also puts me in another question was about repetition, right? Like, I see a person putting out the same content over and over and over and over again. Does that also increase influence? Like, if you say something once, is it done with, or do you need to repeat it over a set number of times before you can create influence, or is that part of the dark arts and a red flag right there?
I would say not, not dark arts, not a red flag. Teachers know if you study pedagogy that students need to have ideas repeated in order for them to sink in. There's this guy, I think his first name was Richard, his last name is Ebbinghaus, who famously studied the decline of memory. And we forget almost everything we learn basically right away. If you think about when you were in school and you were, at least if you were like me and you procrastinated and you would cram before exams, you cram all this information into your mind, you remember it the next day for the exam, you pass, but then what would happen if your teacher had lost your test and you had to take the exam again the following day? You would fail it because everything fell out of your brain. And what Ebbinghaus found was that that steep memory decline with each repetition gets less steep. So the more chances you have to engage your brain with this idea, the more likely you are to remember it. And many of the most successful communicators in politics, so stepping away from advertising and marketing altogether, where advertisers and marketers used to say when I was in industry myself that people needed to have 6 or 7 exposures to remember your advertising message. Now it would be higher, probably, I'm assuming, because we're bombarded with all these advertising messages online.
Zoe, you must have interviewed so many people, or at least researched so many people who have influence, right? Can you tell me about like 3 people who you think are brilliant at influencing or have influence? And what is it in them that probably gives them that ability?
Um, the first person I'll describe is my husband, who I talked about in this chapter toward the end of the book. And he's one of those people who is quiet and doesn't take up a lot of space in the room. But when he shares an idea, people turn around and they listen. And we met when he was a student in my class, but he was visiting Yale as part of a fellowship where he was a mid career person. It's not like I was dating a 19-year-old. And he works on media and democracy in the Arab world. And his whole work is empowering other people to share their voices so that we can collectively hear a diverse group of great ideas rather than hearing from the same people all the time. And he's one of the people who exemplifies this behavioral difference between introverts and extroverts, which a lot of us haven't thought about in these terms. But the difference between introverts and extroverts is that introverts think before they speak, and extroverts think while they speak to figure out what they think. And what that means is that the bar for quality of ideas is far higher for introverts. As leaders, this is really important because we have introverts and extroverts on our team and in our organization. The ideas that introverts are not sharing, on average, are better than the ideas that extroverts are sharing, even if everybody's equally smart. So, a big part of our job is bringing out introverts' great ideas, and that's the work that my husband does. But he is also so audacious about asking for, he has huge ideas, and he will ask people to participate in things or to do things that are far greater than they might have even imagined themselves doing. So, on their own behalf or on behalf of a project, or he'll just go and negotiate and ask for things. And what he ends up doing in the chapter that I described, this one particular story, is he has this dream that he wants to organize and fund the first ever televised presidential debates in the Arab world. And he wants to have this media experience be simulcast on every television and radio station in Tunisia, where this election is happening. And this quiet but audaciously big dreaming brand of influence ends up changing the course of history and influencing the presidential election. It's not that he was trying to get one person elected, but the person who ends up being elected is somebody who no one had, very few people had ever heard of, and was running against a media mogul who had been jailed for embezzlement. So
Wow.
I look at the political situation in Tunisia right now, and I don't say like, "Oh, fantastic! This is wonderful! Yay, democracy!" And I'm sure that my husband might describe the story differently, but but big dreams, great ideas, being willing to express them, but not being aggressive and grabby, but being a quiet person who people want to listen to. There are so many people like this through the course of history. And you asked for three people. Another person who is like this to me is the person who was the head of my organization, Yale School of Management, when I came in to work here, who is now my friend, and his name is Ted Snyder. And he works really hard to bring out the best in other people. And the one of the big ways that he does that is by having very high standards for them and giving a lot of freedom. And this is another combination. So I described this combination of quiet and audacious. And Ted has a combination of high standards and freedom about how you get there. And a lot of really influential leaders are people who have qualities that don't typically go together. And I think we find a lot of these people when we look at who are who are the people that we find ourselves being happy to be influenced by. And actually, you know what, for the third one, I want to bounce it back to you, Ashton, if you're willing. Who's someone that you look at in your life or your sphere who you admire as an influencer or
I was
influential person?
I was actually gonna okay, so this can be twisted into another question because I was actually gonna ask you about the Kardashians, right? Like they have created a universe of influence, right? It is just unbelievable what they have done. And to think about it is just mind boggling. How did they end up creating that influence in the world? Like millions of people being influenced by what they say. And it's not just popularity or it's not just beauty, it's not just any of those kinds of things because tons of people have that. What was it that was so, you know, influential in them? That's something that I was just thinking about when you were talking, saying that, these guys are out there. They're like, they created this world of influencing
Yes,
or influencers.
the people we love to hate,
Yeah.
right? And that we can't tear our eyes away from. So one thing is that influence really is very often very visual. So
Mm.
it's not a coincidence that they're absolutely beautiful. But something that they did, and were some of the first people to do this, is not only were they essentially princesses that got all of the attraction and appeal of a Disney princess story in real life
Mm.
because of their wealth and their beauty and their fame, but they let us intimately into their lives. So they had this reality show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, that back in the day when we didn't have actually, as far as I know, any other celebrities that let us into their intimate lives. So we got to feel like we knew them as people. And it was incredibly compelling to have them let us see that they were flawed. So they weren't trying to be perfect. They were so human so that we could relate to them. So we admired them, we hated them, we wanted to be like them, maybe wanted to sleep with them, maybe wanted to look like them, all of these mixed feelings. But then they could also come across as not being better or superior to us. So I think this recipe, this was again a paradoxical thing where they were admirable in many, many ways, and then they were human and flawed in this very intimate way. This combination drew our attention and continues to draw our attention. And in the United States, Donald Trump is an example of someone else who has used exactly these same kinds of influence techniques. So being so wealthy and so powerful, lots of people love him, lots of people hate him, and then letting everyone into these intimate, flawed, human, personal details of his life, where compared to someone like Joe Biden, who's our president now, people know very little about Joe Biden, very many personal details about Donald Trump. And he
Correct.
dominated the media cycle, not just in the US, but in the world for so long. So, this is a recipe that I don't recommend that people emulate, but it is a very powerful recipe.
So is it a cocktail of strength and vulnerability that people are responding to?
Um, Related to strength and vulnerability, it's certainly a type of strength and vulnerability. And I think there are lots of people who can show strength and vulnerability in a way that would be more, I don't know, admirable, like more of a way that you would actually like to emulate that person. And can you think of someone, Ashton, who demonstrates strength and vulnerability in a way that appeals to you?
Mm, I will have to think about this. I can't think of anyone who comes off the top of my head. Um, no, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. Do you
Do
have
you,
somebody in mind?
I was wondering if you're one of these people, actually.
So the thing is that I don't necessarily showcase the vulnerable aspects of my life. Um, in fact, it was quite interesting. Since you asked this, there was a time when it used to be about showing off, right? So it started off as like, the whole fitness world and influencing that, and like, what can you do in terms of your pull-ups and your push-ups and your strength and all of that. And then suddenly people said that, now, Ashton, all of this is actually demotivating us because we don't think that we can actually do it the way that you're doing it. So why are you showing so much of it? So I was like, that also makes an interesting point. All right, maybe I need to tone this down a little bit. And then it was all about, am I making people feel FOMO? Am I like, why should I be showcasing a life that I lead? Um like I was telling my friend the other day, if I fly by private jet, would I put up that picture? Would I not put up that picture? Right? Because there's a saying that's saying that if you ever fly in a private jet and you don't put up a picture, did you really fly? Right? So like,
I haven't heard that.
it's like if you had a meal and you didn't take a picture of it and post it, did you actually have that meal? So in the same vein. And I was like, would I actually do that? Because am I trying to influence saying that this is the kind of lifestyle that I lead or not? Like, so these are, I think, at some level, the kind of moral debates that I have on influence, because when you put yourself out there, it is all the messaging that you're putting out, right? So these are things that I at least internally debate.
Yeah. I'm going to be thinking about that question about strength and vulnerability as I go about the rest of my day. As you and I are talking, it's early morning where I live, and I hadn't thought at all about people like the Kardashians in those terms, but I find it very poignant and illuminating. So thank you for that.
Maybe we can use this podcast as an example. Maybe from tomorrow onwards, let me see if I can showcase vulnerability as well
Oh, I
in my
love it.
life on social media, and let's see what happens. I think it'll be an interesting social experiment to try
Can I,
out.
could I challenge you to start today? And can I ask you to share with us? And actually, you already have shared one little professional thing where you were trying to not use these manipulative tactics, and then your online program didn't go gangbusters. But
Yeah.
is there anything that you'd be willing to share, maybe from your personal life, that hasn't gone perfectly exactly the way you hoped? Maybe
Also,
recently. It doesn't have to be big.
so many things. I remember. So my book came out in Feb, right? And then because of the book, you get invited to all these talks, and those talks were going fantastically. People loved me. Everyone was cheering, etc., etc., etc. Till this one speaking assignment came, and I was talking to a room of, I think, 500 people. And the way that this room had been built was there was a seating area in the middle, and there were stalls all around. Okay, so people could move to the stalls and talk, etc., etc. So the audience was dissipating, and all this while I was used to a captive audience sitting and listening to me, and my delivery was meant for a captive audience, but I didn't realize that I was dealing with people who are a wandering audience, people walking out, getting tea, coming, sitting down, having conversations, meeting people. And for the first time, I didn't know what to do. I was out of my depth, and it was, in my mind, it sucked. Like, it was one of the worst performances that I ever given. For the first time on stage, I was looking at the watch saying, please, when is that 1 hour going to end? It was so bad, so bad, so bad. I got off stage and I was angry and was upset, and everybody wanted to come and talk to me, and I was like, no, I don't want to talk to anybody right now. And it was pure trauma. I come back, I'm flying back to Bombay, and I'm at the airport, and I was like, why did this happen? What happened? And I actually sat down and analyzed it. And I realized, what are the things that I possibly need to do from that point onwards? A large part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you was this, right? How do you have influence on people like this in an audience that is transitionary? How do you create that sense of excitement? Because what was interesting was that the speaker that went ahead of me was high power, in your face, running up and down the aisles, talking to people, but my sense of delivery was very different, or my style of delivery was very different. And that made me question, do I need to change the style of delivery? Do I need to learn how to do it for different audiences? So I think that was a big learning and a big failure. So Zoe, like, when people ask me what's going to be written on your tombstone, I say fail, 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 win. That's the thing, because like failure is just a best friend that teaches you so much.
I love that you're sharing this example, Ashton, and I could visualize this and feel for you so vividly as you described it. And it doesn't sound to me like that was a failure for you, but that was a failure for the conference organizers. And I would, when, when I understand the context of a situation when I'm supposed to be speaking or teaching, and if it's a context like that where people are coming in and out, I say no to it. So you are set up to feel the way that you felt in a situation like that. It's just like, why would you bring an expert like Ashton to come and talk to a room of people who's milling around and getting tea and like going to all of these booths? That's just a terrible setup. So I think it's really funny that the level of audience engagement tends to increase with the the number of people, and also the it's not the not the size of the venue, but it's that a lot of speakers get nervous. Like, say, you're going to go and speak in a room of 500 people. A lot of people have never spoken in front of a room of 500 people. But if that room is a group of 500 people who are there to just listen to you, they create the energy and the audience creates the buzz. And you need to bring some zaza, but the audience gives a lot of it back to you. And this is much more than if you're in a room of 50 people. And the same thing with the audience expectations. So when you're there as the keynote speaker, just the audience expectations that you're the person and you're hot and you're interesting, and they bring that out of you, versus the expectations if you are one of many breakout speakers and you're in a hotel room where people are milling around and the sound quality is bad and echoes. It's not it's not a situation where you were set up for success. And I think this is important for people to hear, because in a lot of the situations where we felt like we failed, or thinking about influence, when somebody said no to us, it is tempting and only sometimes helpful to go through and debrief, what did I do wrong and what could I do better? Because so much of the time, what you did was nothing wrong, and what you could do is maybe even nothing better. And the reason that this failed, the reason that the other person said no, has nothing to do with you. And it's the context and the other person. And, if you imagine yourself in the audience, you're thinking that this speaker must not have anything super important to say, or the organizers wouldn't have put them there in this situation, right? And Ashton, your way of being isn't a way of being that's this rah, high energy, motivational sales speaker running up and down the aisles, microphone in somebody's face. So if that's what the conference organizers wanted, they didn't make a good decision when they picked you, because what you bring are messages that are impactful and they're deep and they're thoughtful, and people need to have space to think about it.
You completely changed my way of thinking around this, because I was like, shit, I need to learn this new skill set instead of playing to my own skill set.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't need to learn every influence skill set.
Hmm.
And conference organizers, they pick content organizers like you, Ashton, and like me. Content speakers, and then they pick motivational speakers. And you and I motivate people through our thoughtful discourse, but we're not motivational speakers. And honestly, there should have been no speaker in that situation. But if the conference organizers needed a speaker in that situation, they just needed to pick a motivational speaker.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine you running up and down saying, "You have influence, you have
Right.
influence, you have influence, everybody has influence."
Yes.
Like,
Mattress for everybody. Yes. Free pillow. Look under your chair for the golden ticket. I enjoy those people sometimes. Like anybody else. Like
you
I
admire them, like,
love,
wow, like, yeah.
yes, comedians, magicians, drag queens. It's fantastic. I love it. It's just not what
It's
we do.
it's not what we do, and I think the way that is it presence? What is it? Is it's not necessary presence, because you can be present and and be quiet and thoughtful, right? Like, you look at Eckhart Tolle and you're like, how does anybody sit through his talk? He's just so slow, but there is influence there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess I think of content speakers versus motivational speakers as, if you had to pick one, is it more about the idea or is it more about the feeling? And
Hmm.
we want to have, all of us want to have both, but you and I are more about the ideas. And a
Yeah.
comedian, drag queen, magician, those people are more about the feelings.
So does that mean that we would never be able to speak at a 2,000 person auditorium or like a concert hall, etc.?
No, and you've probably done it, and I've done it a bunch of times, but the the audience needs to be there expecting somebody like us. And so the conference organizers will typically have a roster of motivational people in between content people. And then for people like you and me as the content people, we'll do some specific things like depending on the tenor of the event, there might be a little bit of call and response, or like I'm not a funny person. Like I haven't said anything funny in this conversation. However, I can bring in funny content. So if I'm using slides, I might have pictures that are unexpected and funny and that have people laugh. And you and I can still have emotional engagement and we can still have everybody coming along with us on this ride. It's just that we shouldn't be the person speaking during cocktail hour at dinner at the conference. Like
Right.
that person should definitely be somebody more like a magician.
Right. Somebody high energy, etc., etc., etc. We
Yeah.
need to be when everyone's sitting down quiet with the notepads out.
Yeah. And it's beautiful what we can deliver, and that's why you get invited. You have all of these speaking invitations, and hopefully most of those are people who know what you do, and that's exactly what they're asking for. So we get people like us who are the content deliverers, we get more invitations than people who are the motivational speakers. And there are fewer of us, more motivational speakers in the world of professional speaking. So you and I are lucky, and we can just claim our lucky space and be happy with it.
Let's own it. I love it, love it, love it. Zoe, this conversation has been eye opening for me. I've taken so many mental notes. I'm going to write them down after this. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How can people get in touch with you? Tell me about the book. You're donating 50% to a charity. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, and thank you. It's just really enjoyable to talk to you, Ashton. And we had a lot of commonality, and then so much more of it came across. So I hope that we keep in touch. This book that I've written, Influence Your Superpower, is it has 50% of my profits going to organizations fighting the climate crisis, which is a cause that I really care about. And I know you, Ashton, are donating some of your profits as well to a charity. So we're like minded in this way. And I'd love to have you remind people what that is in a moment. But people who want to reach out to me, first of all, I'm on LinkedIn. You're welcome to connect with me, Zoe Chance. And I have a website, zoechance.com, where you can find lots more stuff. So thank you for inviting me. And please tell us about your book and your charity.
So my books, the Change Your Habits, Change Your Life, and the Book of Good Habits for Kids, everything that comes to me is going to a charity called the Light of Life Trust. So this is a charity where I'm a trustee at, and I was saying that it's not that we really make a ton of money from books, but everything that comes in goes there because ultimately it's about educating children and getting them out of the generational cycle of poverty. Zoe, like in India, it's crazy because of rural India. So many kids are poor because their parents were poor and their grandparents were poor because nobody finished educating themselves. Nobody finished their education. Nobody learned how to upskill themselves. So as a result, they have no chance of earning any money. And so we work with over 2 lakh children, pushing them through school, making sure that they finish that, and ultimately coming out with uh, a better life. So that's what the NGO does, and that's what the money is going towards.
It's amazing. Thank you. And this is a great example of what I believe it should look like for us to have more power and influence in the world. That we share it and we say, what kind of difference can I make? And this is ultimately the Spider Man doctrine that with great power comes great responsibility. So, for anyone who's still not sure about do I want to exercise influence, do I even want to have more power? Actually, it shouldn't be just for you. And the more influence you have, the more of a difference you can make. And I admire your goal and
Thank
execution in
you.
that. Thank you.
Zoe, you don't do anything online for people? You don't have any classes online or any place where people can learn more about influence, etc., do you?
I'm working on an online class right now, so I'm taking longer than I wanted to, but that's in progress.
Okay, you got your first student here. Whenever you put it up, so please do let me know when that happens. And yes,
Thank you.
definitely we must stay in touch. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Ashton.
If you like this episode, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, give us a rating. It really helps with people discovering the podcast. If you like podcasts like this, check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can also watch all the episodes on the Habit Coach Awesome 180 YouTube channel. Follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, everywhere. You can also reach out to me. I am Ashdin Doc at Twitter and Instagram. You can connect with me on my website, awesome180.com. You can also check out my 2 new books, Change Your Habits, Change Your Life, and the second, The Book of Good Habits for Kids. I am Ashdin Doctor, your habit coach.
IVM.